Okay, so it started with Adam Doerner, and he came from Germany via California. He worked a year or two at Behringer's and headed north. I think the draw here was he came to work on the Winchester Bridge. He was a concrete man. And while he was here, there were other Germans, the von Pessels, and what? You don't like the way I tell the story? He's buying. He bought property and sent back to Germany for his bride, and that's how they got here.
Yes, Adam had. In Germany, he had been, I don't know if he'd been a brewmaster or whatever there. He'd been in the Kaiser's army. He was a corporal, and this was related. You know, obviously it's third hand or fourth hand for me. That he had. I mean, they understood the war was coming way before they just looked for an excuse, and they had the opportunity. And so then he immigrated. Sailed around the Horn, went to San Francisco, went up to St. Helena and worked for the Behringers. And then, meanwhile, he had some old German friends or whatever that were up here. They contacted him, or he contacted them, and they said they were growing grapes up here and they could grow the kind that he wanted. So he took a train to Canyonville, and then they had to get on a stagecoach because that's as far as it went. And then he came up and he lived with the, I believe it was the Von Pessels, and he found some property and he started that sort of thing. And I don't know how many years or whatever went on. And then he sent for his girlfriend or whatever it was, and she sailed around the Horn also to San Francisco, and then by this time they finished the railroad to Roseburg, and he met her at the station with a wagon, and he took her to the courthouse, and they made it legal, and brought her home. And my father-in-law always told about his grandmother. He said, well, you know, my grandfather was the boss, but my grandmother ran it all. And and it was kind of always interesting that his view of his grandmother. She wasn't a very big person, but apparently ruled the roost pretty much.
I think it first started out he grew enough for himself, and then it developed into a business. I know that they used to Sundays at the Doerners, and probably as my grandfather then went into I think he was more serious in the business sense. But they would have the German community would come and they would spend the day sitting around the yard all drinking Doerner wine.
Originally, this area, they had different areas that had, you know, the Germans lived here, and the French lived, you know, in Melrose, and Elgroves had the Swedish community, and they were all wine drinkers from the old country. They were all immigrants. So, and they planted grapes actually a couple different times. They had Riesling. Adam had brought up Zinfandel from Behringer's, and I don't know exactly. I've seen a list. When we later reproduced some of these things, we still had part of a vineyard. Zinfandel, Sauvignon Vert, one called Isabella. Berger was another, which was a German one. And those were still left. Unfortunately, the Riesling was no longer there, because we would have liked to have grown that one.
But Adolf ran it as a business. He and his wife, neither of them drank. He was a total teetotaler. Adam, I think, drank quite heavily, from what I gather. I mean, my memories of the winery are from the time I remember. I mean, there always was a winery, and it always had wine in it, and you'd go over, and it was dark, and it smelled really good, and they bottled it. He went to town once a week on Fridays, drove a station wagon, and he'd load it with wine, and he would go to town and get rid of it. That was his marketing. I remember, and I don't know where it went, but we always went to the Greyhound bus depot. And so he must have shipped wine, Greyhound, you know, to some other, the coast or Grants Pass or someplace. But it wasn't, wasn't a romance of the wine like there is now. It was something you drank, and it was a business, you know.
Well, when Adam and the German community, and there are some photos of them on Sundays. I mean, they had whole families would come out, and they would literally spend the day, and they would, you know, and they were all immigrants, and they were used to drinking wine, and it was, you know, all that sort of thing. And then, you know, America changed for some years, and different groups and things, and so you know, till 19 kind of went south for a while, till 1960 or so, and then it started going the other way again.
So at that time, you know, the winery was the only one I'm told in Oregon that survived Prohibition, and they quit making wine
sometime in the 50s.
In the early 50s, I think, yeah. And then later, after my grandfather died, my father didn't really have an interest in the winery. He decided it was more bother than it was worth. And he loaded the last of it. The Umpqua tanker truck came out and loaded it up and took it, put it on a tanker car and the railroad tracks, and it was shipped to New York, supposedly to be made into vinegar. No, it wasn't that much. It was
30,000.
But during that time, they had a small block of grapes left, and that was the time that we met Richard Sommers. He came north, and he had a lot of questions, and I can remember as a child him tootling up on a weekend, a rainy day, and coming to the door. I don't know what he needed, and you know, asking my mother, who was that man? And he tended the little vineyard for a year or so, and I believe he made some wine off of it also. We kind of thought he was crazy, you know. Making wine. Why would you want to do that? Well, he was a really young man then, you know, he was like a college student.
But we had dealt with him for years and years and things, and he, you know, he really was an innovative person, and he, of course, he not only did the Pinot, that he was really into Riesling, and it was just interesting to see some things that we shipped him some Zinfandel and some Merlot and sort of Syrah, I think, and he just he was always looking for kind of new adventures. We kind of knew him in his best when Patty Green and Donna April and they were involved, and they kept things going really well. Later on, after Dyson DeMar and Susan had purchased it, and we were up one time because it was a storage area, and Dyson, and we were trying, and he brought out some Riesling that was absolutely rocket. And I go, where did this come from? He says, there's pallets of it. I said, I have never tasted this before. He said, nope, you'd be saving it. And it was, I mean, really, really wonderful.
Yeah. So fast forward, you came back from Oregon State, and Scott Henry had planted grapes down here, and my brother had returned. He'd had a job in San Francisco, and between the two of them, they decided they wanted to grow grapes. And my dad said, "Why in the world would you want to do that?" But okay. And so we planted them, and then he later planted grapes again and said he was going to show us how it was done. And in the end, he ended up changing his ways.
The spacings and the different
well,
directions.
and everything he did was, head pruned, and we had wire and trellis, and he ended up doing the same. Of course, I mean, everything. I remember my grandfather dusting grapes. He had a pump duster, and it was a backpack thing, and poof, 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 everywhere. Stink. Oh.
There was none. Yeah, it was before that. Ralph Guerin actually was the head of the small fruits at Oregon State, and it was because of, actually, I had been in Europe and before that, and had kind of stumbled upon the wine areas as I was doing some traveling, and so it was interesting, to do some things, and Oregon State was, this was just coming on, and there were, I've since these people now have come in, but it was in the original group. They were kind of interesting. I mean, these people were, and Doyle Hinman and I had discussed this for years. It was the Pinot thing, and we grew a little Pinot, and Doug grew more than I did, and I said, I am not, there's too much planted, and I didn't do it. And then Doyle Hinman and I have talked numerous times after this and went, said, how could we be so wrong? Said, I have no idea. But it was, the Pinot thing, and as we see out here now, I mean, we have all these northern wineries who are coming to the Umpqua Valley to grow Pinot and some of these varieties. It's kind of interesting to see that. So, but yeah, we've lived long enough that we see that people are thinking that Chardonnay is a good idea again.
I heard that. I heard you say that, and I went, oh, we had years we couldn't even get rid of it.
Oh, yeah.
I think we should be known for able to grow a lot of things. Variety.
We have seen it was interesting to see what the Doerners had, because we compare, there's some photos, and I have to look for them, of either Adolf or Adam Doerner with a prune box, what the size of a prune box is, and 5 bunches of Zinfandel filled it.
Yeah,
that's how large they were.
Big
There's a photo of it. 5 bunches filled.
I remember that photo.
And so we've watched it, and they were able to, and it's interesting listening to Shelley's father, and here we have all this modern equipment now, and we're checking the sugars and the pH and the acids, and we're doing that. And he said, well, how'd your dad look at it? He says when they start to pucker the fruit, then it was time to pick. But okay, that's a whole different sort of deal. So actually it was like the Zinfandel clone, and I spoke to some people at UC Davis. They were doing a heritage thing about Zinfandel, and I said, I have one that has been growing up in Oregon here since the 1870s, and I said, if you guys ever want to, as we're replanting all our vineyards now because of phylloxera, we will, we have some, and we'll graft some over, and we'll keep some just, it's a heirloom kind of a thing, Well,
I think at first no one took it seriously,
This was everyone
now
who planted grapes
now
here.
it's a real business, you know.
I mean, first of all, they were all farmers. And Scott Henry's background, I mean, he has a farming background. And we started small. All of us started with an acre, you know, and then, you know, the big guys were 20 acres. And we thought, I mean, and probably the biggest thing that we, other than the phloxera problem and rootstocks, was the trellising systems. We did everything on wood, and now, you know, we don't have any wood, and then we did it, I mean, we have changed. When we originally started, it would take us days to pound in an acre of wood posts and all this. Now, I mean, we can literally put acres and acres in every day. A different thing. Spacings have changed. We're watching our neighbors here, duck pond, and their spacing is way different than ours. So we've watched that, and one of the things the industry missed here in Southern Oregon is that because of the phloxera thing and all the discussions that said it's not going to happen, and if it is, it's going to be slow. That isn't true. And so all the original research that was done in the Umpqua Valley was done on river bottom, and they had all these different rootstocks that had no correlation to the rest of us who were dryland farming up on the benches. And so when we realized we had a problem and we started doing this, it's like, this is, you know, and unfortunately for some of the California transplants who, you know, Dyson DeMar, who was then with Mondavi, said, oh, well, this ought to work, and this ought to, and my experiences in Germany tell me this is going to go. And so at least that gave us a clue. And because what was being pushed by the nurseries, you know, this dry land, you know, it isn't good, they won't work here. That's probably the biggest change.
Evolution.
Yes, evolution is right. Metamorphosis, actually. So. Well, you know, the Umpqua Valley, when we started, and Scott Henry was just fortunately, we lived in the right place to have, you know, a wonderful guy who shared his knowledge with us, and then we have our neighbors here, La Paris. You don't see the ranch from this side here, but you know, the older growers, I mean, we were just smaller, you know.
Well, and we shared things. I mean,
oh, absolutely,
even equipment
and whatever. We were all in, and then a little later, of course, we've seen a large influx of a group of people who you know, come in and put 100 acres in, and actually they don't put 100 acres in. Somebody comes in and does it for them, which is like not, you know, the older people here, there isn't anyone who did not put their own grapes in, and it's like one of the ways you can tell is kind of a joke that is the wire height, and in our first wires for the, and you can tell if it's us doing the work or if it's hired labor, because if it's you doing the work, it's right up here, and the rest of them, it's down on the ground.
Or it's lower.
It's really lower, and you go,
harder on your back.
It would kill you to be doing that for, you know, 8-10 hours. So that's kind of one of the funny things you notice.
We've had some self-made hurdles. Probably just some different business decisions. I mean, when it started out as a grower, we had some years we even shipped grapes to California. You had to be able to help carry the wineries financially. They depended on you know, the spread out, and that's changed. You know, now, you know, you sell your grapes and it's more of a business deal. When we some of the first years we sold grapes, we sold to Giardes, and it wasn't large quantities, but we would pick, I think it was Riesling, wasn't it?
Actually, Chardonnay.
Chardonnay, and then we'd take it out there, and then
we'd run it through the
then we'd have to help them run it through the crusher.
And
And
Philip
come
and Bonnie would, you know, and they had this equipment. I mean, they were just starting
Just
like
starting
everyone, and their crew was their children who were little kids, and so you would work all day, and then you go out
and help them,
and you would help so
them
you get your bins back.
Yeah, it was okay.
And that was okay. I mean, Bonnie Darraday was a wonderful woman, and
it was fine.
And but that's just, and it just wasn't us. It was, you know, the people at a whole. We did that sort of thing. And Richard Mansfield, who was Callahan Ridge, was, you know, quite a promoter, good guy, good winemaker, and it was always a, you know, fun thing. We used to have something. The growers did a pig feed.
Well, they still do some years, but it's different than it was.
But it's different. It was the real growers, and a lot of your crew people, you know, were invited and whatever, and then it kind of, you know, it went from there to a whole different thing. It wasn't, you know, the real crew out there doing that sort of thing. But it's, you know, that's kind of the maturation of any business.
Not really.
Shelley's brother was, and we
did a little in the beginning, but we just didn't have time.
Yeah.
We didn't have time, and you know, we were growing grapes, and a lot of that was more towards wineries and marketing. I mean, you know, not that we didn't want to support them, but you know, they would be more involved than we would as growers.
Well, some of the early things too.
We had families. I mean, we had,
yeah.
And grapes aren't the only thing, you know. Over the years, we have sheep, and we've grown Christmas trees, and I mean, we've had other crops to deal with. So. And
the original part of the things that went on in the wine industry was really only geared for North. It wasn't anything down there.
We did kind of feel like stepchildren.
Yes, absolutely. And then, you know, and the taxing issues and things was a real gripe, because we were paying a tax, and we considered it a sin tax for growing grapes, and it was supposed to be promoting Oregon wines, and then we were shipping our grapes to Fetzer's in California, and then they immediately changed it, and I had to pay taxes in Oregon for what I shipped to California, and I thought that was a little unjust, and so.
But it's all evolved, you know. I mean, the industry needs a centralized organization like wine growers.
And they've done it, and I'm the first to admit their promotion of Pinot is phenomenal. They have done something that I cannot believe, and you know, the Pinot has been, you know, the standard Oregon wine, which was kind of, you know, there were all kinds of other wines and things there, and they've done a wonderful job. They've been able to promote themselves, and whatever I had kind of thought that I wish that more research had been done, you know, not only in the clones but the rootstocks and all that sort of thing. I didn't feel that maybe that there'd been enough investment in that.
Sky's the limit.
I used to have, Bobby Fetzer used to come up, and he was, the Fetzer family were really, really nice people. And they would come up, and we used to deal with them, and we just thought this was like the rest of us, just a little mom-pop operation. And then we went down and realized this is like this is not a mom-and-pop operation. And Bobby Fetzer would come out, bouncing out, and go, "Hey, I'm Bobby Fetzer." And it's like, oh my goodness sakes. And then spend the day with you running around, and we were just hodunk little growers. And then he would come in, he liked to fish, and he was just a character, and we got along. And you know, they'd fly in, or he'd drive in and give us a call on a Sunday morning, say, "Hey, I'm on my way to Seattle. Yeah, let's go look at grapes or that." And So I don't know.
But he all he could say was this area just looked like, what is it?
Well, it was the Redwood Valley.
Redwood Valley when he moved there.
He said, you ought to be looking at acquiring more real estate. He said, this place, it's got a lot of potential, and he'd be gawking as he was driving around, and it's kind of come to that perhaps as you can look around, probably in the last 3 years, there are 1,000 new acres here, give or take, something like that. So interesting. Hopefully there'll be more.
And hopefully with that we'll preserve enough area. I'm not so sure that John Q. Public in Douglas County realizes how important agriculture is, or retaining these lands that could potentially be vineyard lands. I don't have any stories to start with.
Quite a few, actually.
It's kind of interesting to Dyson DeMar, who's, as you've met, is just what a character. And the things that probably 10 years ago now, I guess, and we were discussing, if you've been through the Napa Valley and you're looking at all these things, and discussing personalities and groups. Yeah, don't go there, she tells me. So, but it's interesting that he said, there'll be some people and come through, and he's right. You see some,
all kinds.
It takes all kinds, I guess, but they're different than the original just farmers that came and grew grapes, definitely. Well.
Yeah, my dad said they made more money during Prohibition than not by selling juice. They said they sold juice and people made their own wine. I didn't have any reason to believe otherwise, but you sure wonder.
But they did well. I mean, they, Adolf and Adam, it kind of goes back to the ethnic German thing, that with their friends who tend to be business people, and they own the grocery stores, and they own the Coca-Cola, turned out Coca-Cola plant and all this.
Mortuary.
The mortuary, yeah. And then you realized, and actually not till Shelley's mother passed away, we're at a mortuary, and Shelley's dad turns to me and goes, we used to own part of this. I'm going, are you serious? I mean, he had never mentioned that. I said, really? And he goes, well, yeah, Dad was chairman of the board. And then you got the kind of the drift that you see these people traded money amongst themselves and did that sort of thing.
Well, it was different. They never operated on borrowed money. I mean,
and their friends, they were in business with their friends.
Yeah.
And somebody had a subdivision and built houses or whatever, and there were lots, and there were just things like that. So you kind of start to see there was a pattern to whatever and why they were all friends, because they were in business together. Common interests and